Okay, not spending more time with the introduction. The first presentation will be about, will be the mobile gaming and apps growing in 2023. So, of course, one of the reasons for those questions is that I think whenever I met with some people from gaming space, I think like a lot of them, had this nostalgia after the, great year 2021, 2020, when everything was growing, and then in many cases the mood in the last months was not the best in gaming especially. So I was thinking, okay, to which extent we know that mobile gaming will be and apps will be growing. So on one side, I thought, okay, it makes sense to maybe ask AI about that. So actually, the AI is thinking that most likely that mobile gaming apps will be growing. I mean, Google is a little bit sure more than ChatGPT. But of course, like I thought, okay, it makes sense a bit more to focus on the data. So I was thinking about how to look by the data, what we can expect in the next months, where are some specific opportunities for the growth. So on one side, if we look at the latest data, and the really latest in the way that the data for March was refreshed yesterday at 9 p.m. Polish time. So it's actually, it's very, very fresh data. And some people tell me that, very often you have very similar presentations, which is sometimes the case, but it allows me to kind of verify my hypothesis. So if I have some, hypothesis based on the data, if I have some, similar presentation based on some most recent data, I can verify that hypothesis, yeah? And if you look at the data for the March 2023 versus the last year, we see that actually the worst is really behind it, yeah? So actually the March this year is the first month for the last many months where actually we don't have negative growth year over year in terms of revenue in gaming. If we look at the Google Play and iOS combined together, so it's like 1%, but still better than zero. And if we look even and compare it with the previous months, was much, much, much worse. If we go deeper and we say, okay, probably like, one swallow doesn't make the summer, it's like, if we just, the first month, it's not necessarily that it would be so great. We can, of course, go deeper with the data. And if we go deeper and we look, okay, what's happening actually on Google Play. So on Google Play, we see, again, the March was the first month when in gaming we didn't have the negative growth year over year. We have some even positive growth in terms of downloads. Still small, which means that even some emerging markets, they slow down in terms of the growth. If we go on iOS side, that situation seems to be even a bit better, especially if we exclude China, because of course, if we look at iOS, it doesn't make sense to look at China because it's usually the market that's not working for most of the, not accessible for most of the companies. Still, of course, like if we look at some discussions around the market, sometimes some people have, worse mood than in the previous months, because let's be realistic, yes. So even if we look at the data, the last 3 years, and if we combine and actually divide that period into three data points, we see that the first period was between 2018 and 2020. We see that in this period, in general, the market in terms of revenue was growing around 12% year over year. Then we had around 12 to 15 months where actually the market was growing extremely strongly. It was 25% 50% year over year. And then the last months, they were mostly on the negative growth. But still, if we combine all those months together, still those few years create together like the average growth around 10% year over year. Which means that if we even actually combine and look at, okay, what is the difference between January 2020 versus March 2023, still that market is higher by like 25% by revenue and around 30% in terms of downloads during those 2 years. If we look at non-gaming, then actually the situation is even better in the way that we had crazy growth in the 2021 especially. The last months, usually the growth is around 12 to 50% year over year. And we see that growth, especially in verticals like education, language learning, health and fitness, actually in finance as well. We see strong growth both on the downloads and the revenue side as well. And if we look at what's happening actually on the both sides in terms of topics related to the revenue and downloads, we see that actually that growth is really nice, especially on the play side. So if we look at the details and we go deeper and we look at what's happening on iOS, then in iOS the situation is even better. Yeah. The situation is even better. It's almost 20% year over year. Yeah, 20% year over year, both in terms of download, in terms of revenue, in terms of downloads, around 12 to 15% year over year. Which means that if we compare the January 2022 versus March 2023, downloads was higher by around 40%. But revenue was higher by around more than 200%. Why actually so big difference? Actually, right now, especially subscriptions in non-gaming are really skyrocketing, and actually both on iOS and on Android side, we see actually more and more even the verticals that did not adapt that in the past, they are really adapting that for the future. If we look, of course, like from another perspective, and we see that, okay, maybe sometimes the mood is not the best one because some people are seeing, okay, that growth on the gaming side especially is not so high. I think part of that story comes even to the point that that if we look at the data, for example, for top mobile companies. Yeah, so I just look at that. Okay, let's look at the data for the top 50 mobile gaming companies in 2022 and what happened with them later. And we see that actually on one side, in the beginning, they were growing faster than the rest of the market. So in general, during the COVID, bigger companies benefited more from this COVID than smaller companies, especially once we have low cost of capital. It was really easy to put a lot of money into the growth, and actually by that just buy the users and extending the payback period. But then what is happening once the COVID ended, the situation of the bigger companies was actually harder than smaller ones. So that's why if we even look at what is the line, what is the difference between those data points, it means that potential feeling around how the gaming is actually declining is even higher on the side of bigger companies than smaller ones. Yeah, and of course, if we know that, for example, in all different conferences, most of the people are coming from the bigger companies, because usually they can afford, for example, to join big conferences, GDC, on some other places. Then, of course, in general, in that area, we'll have more discussion around how actually that market is really challenging. It is, but actually not so heavy as we sometimes think. And then if we even go further, and sometimes we feel that, okay, this competition on the market is growing, but not always as heavily as we think. So, for example, like if we even look at and compare, okay, let's see, look at the games in US. What share of the revenue was taken by top 10 games, top 50, top 100, top 1,000? If we look at the 2020, 2021, 2022, it was not that bigger companies were taking higher share of the revenue. That kind of share was quite stable. And what was actually quite interesting, it was, if we look at, okay, what revenue was taken by those top games, and if all those top games combined together, what share of downloads were they taking? We see actually that in this case, that share of the top companies were similar, but with declining share of the downloads, which means that in this case, those companies were able to kind of sustain the position by mostly growing the monetization. So they were achieving similar share of the revenue, but still losing on downloads. But because they were increasing the monetization, they will still were able to keep the pace. And of course, if we say, okay, that gaming, especially, it's not so easy space anymore. We know it's quite complex. So, for example, even to understand how actually professional business became, see at quite interesting data. So, if we look at, for example, what is the average time since the game release in years? If we look at top 10 games that were in top 10 games in US in last month, you see that average time from release was more than 7 years. If we look at the top 50 games, it was 6 years. So that's how kind of professional and sophisticated the business became, that of course those top positions are actually still taken by the games that are many years ago. But it's not that they are just big companies. In this, it's very professional approach to business, because, for example, see at those top 10 games, the average time since release was 6 days. So if I did that specific analysis, by average, those games were updated 6 days before. So how demanding that business became, and how actually fresh update it requires, in the way that how much actually you need to keep with that specific audience. And then if we look even, for example, okay, what is the average ratings of the games for like top 10, top 50, top 100, top 1,000, and what is even the number of average active number of days in the for those top games. And of course, if we even look at some recent information, like in the recent earnings call of Playtika, they mentioned that, for example, they will not really even, they kind of are stopping development of new games. They are more focusing on investment and buying smaller studios. And I think if we even sometimes have that perception that now is the time where actually only the big companies can survive, actually we see that actually on one side that business is really big, professional, and quite competitive, but on the other side, even really big companies have the challenges to kind of keep the innovation, which means I think it's better time for smaller companies that actually can really be sometimes innovative and then attract investment, for example, from from bigger players. And of course, the questions are, okay, if we just set aside where are the opportunities both for the gaming and the app side. And I think there are still some opportunities on the market, which is like, let's see, if we look at that like time spent by devices, for example, like still we see that the market is very mature, but still that percentage in terms of what is the share of time spent on the mobile phones is actually still growing, even if it's really high, but it's still growing. We see that, for example, apps in games are still very important part of the people's life. Yes, so for example, like based on the recent data, we see that just like more than 90% of the time and engagement is actually still focusing on apps. We still see that if we look at being focused on Android and iOS, both for the games, for the apps, still, and Android and iOS are really kind of still taking majority of the time. We see that. I really actually encourage you to read that report. It's a really good one around in general the users' engagement on apps. We see that, for example, still iOS and Android actually are growing, especially on the Android side. Still, we see that gaming is very important part of the life, because that the share of the users who are actually playing the video games at any device is really high. Still, we see that, for example, there is very interesting opportunity on cross-platform, and we see that, for example, based on the most recent research from Newzoo, it's like only 34% of users in gaming are mobile only, and actually that data point is quite interesting, because if we compare it with the data in 2019, around 42% were mobile only. So just during the 3 years, that percentage of the people who using more than was just one device for gaming is actually really growing. Yeah? 50% of gamers are playing at least three platforms. And then even we see that more and more users are actually expecting this cross-platform seamless approach, especially in South Korea, United States, China, UK, Germany, and France. And then we see that actually, based on the data, that those cross-platform users are not only actually on one side are expected to pay more. The more devices you use, in general, the more likely you pay in the games. But what is quite interesting, actually, the data shows that cross-platform users are actually younger than single device users. So the new generations actually starting to use more and more devices, which actually means quite important point for gaming, but I think for apps as well. And of course, what is quite important and quite interesting is actually how it's relating, actually, for example, to the multiplayer gaming. So in this newest data of Unity, we see that actually this share of the multiplayer gaming is actually growing over the last months and years, which means it's actually will be more and more important part of the growing business on mobile. And then 5G as a quite interesting opportunity. Yeah? So for example, like I'm so surprised that not so many people are talking about 5G in terms of what it means for gaming, what it means for apps. Look at the data, comparing 2021, 2023, how that coverage in many countries really increased in just 2 years. Like in most countries, it grew from like 20% then more than 50%. Still not compromising on the speed. It's not just that coverage of 5G is growing. At the same time, that average speed of that 5G is not really declining. Yeah, which means that if we talk about some more sophisticated gaming, like for example, browser gaming, I think a lot of challenges, for example, in the past for gaming on browsers were coming, for example, to the connections. But once you have better and better connections, then of course it's way easier to think about those experiences as well. And of course, then we can ask ourselves, okay, what are the country opportunity questions? And of course, if we look at, okay, what's happening in games in terms of US, we see that it's actually on one side, last months were not very positive for US in terms of share and growth rate for US and for the growth of downloads. But on the other side, we see that again, March this year was the first month for the many last months where actually we had small but still positive year-over-year growth rate for US in terms of gaming. And if we look at iOS, it's a little bit below the zero, but still much higher than in the previous months. If we look at non-gaming, that US is actually very strong for the last months. We see that again, especially on the subscription side, especially on topics related to some trials and all topics related to subscription. We see that US is very strong, and we have even like 30% year over year, like between 20 to 30% year over year growth rate in terms of US. And in terms of iOS, this growth is actually quite nice as well. But what it means in terms of the actual data, that's actually the share of the marketing spend based on the Google data. Like if we integrate and combine all Google spend, and we aggregate it, and we look at what percentage of in general the UA budgets goes to different countries. So for example, you see there are some types of the games that are extremely US heavy, like for example, like Solitaire and Match 3 are extremely US centric genres. But then, if we, for example, we see at non-gaming, there are some genres that are extremely US heavy as well, like pregnancy, antivirus. But then, if we look to some other gaming, like for example, like strategy and other RPG, we see some new actually countries coming, like for example, South Korea, Japan, of course, like Germany are really strong there as well. And then if we look even some non-gaming genres, for example, like mobile payments, in finance, emerging markets are extremely strong. For example, like if we look at mobile payments, we see that like India, Brazil, those are extremely strong markets. The very similar cases in terms of in terms of like banking, in terms of forex, in terms of a lot of those different kind of genres that are not really related to just gaming. The same, for example, in terms of like productivity tools, those genres are quite spread across many geos. And in the same, for example, if we look at language learning, for example, yes, so we see that, okay, US is quite important, but countries like Germany, France, Brazil, India, they are actually really heavy in terms of learning languages, like the same dating. Yeah, so especially I would say that importance of US, it's in general higher in gaming than non-gaming, and in general those emerging markets they play more important role in non-gaming than in gaming, but it will be changing very soon. And of course, still even in gaming we see some genres, being distributed across many different geos. Like for example, like board games are a good example. Yeah, so like in India, the board games are extremely popular, so they can really be very strong. So if we ask ourselves, okay, will be the mobile gaming and apps growing 2023? Maybe in that case, actually, I can be quite correct if it's saying that, okay, there are some potentials for growth there. I still believe there are. and it's both in gaming, non-gaming. And again, of course, that presentation is quite general, but on the other hand, I encourage you, if you like to get a bit more details about specific genre, just reach out to me, and I'm happy to actually share some more insights around specific topics. So just to summarize, the worst is behind us. I think details are often much more better than average. There are some places where you can find some niches. I think this closed platform is actually more and more important, and actually this deeper view gives kind of deeper understanding what actually we can get. And that would be all from my side. That's my email address. If you would like to reach out to me, please let's connect on the LinkedIn as well. Happy to have that conversation around those topics.